Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. After the break, we are now moving to the other format dedicated to the EU digital policy. We are going to hear more about the European data strategy, the idea of creating common European data spaces, but also in regards to the current coronavirus crisis. How vulnerable is Europe's technology ecosystem? How private sector, especially SMEs, are impacted by the outbreak, and also whether this situation might turn out to be an opportunity for Europe's digital services. I am honored to introduce Ivo Volman, Head of Unit Data Policy and Innovation at the DG Connect at the European Commission, and moderator of the session, Samuel Stolton, Digital Editor at EURACTIV. Samuel, the floor is yours.
Barbara. And hello to everyone tuning in around the world at the moment. It's a shame that we can't be together in a physical realm today, but I'm very pleased that we've been able to connect digitally as part of the first ever digital only Cybersec conference, where today I'll be talking about the EU's data strategy with Ivo Volman, Head of the Data Policy and Innovation Unit at the Commission's DG Connect. So the Commission recently unveiled its data strategy, which looks to exploit the untapped potential of troves of industrial data, allowing public and private actors easy access to huge reserves of information. Proposals put forward in February include the creation of 9 common EU data spaces across sectors including healthcare, agriculture, and energy, as well as the establishment of a Data Act in 2021 that could foster business-to-government data sharing for the public interest. The Commissioner for the Internal Market, Thierry Breton, said at the time that the EU had missed the boat on personal data at the height of the platform explosion. And as a result, the EU now is seeking to redress the balance by ensuring the bloc makes the most of the industrial data it produces. But of course, amid the current coronavirus crisis, the subject of how data can be used to the advantage of citizens has never been a more pertinent question. And reports this morning state that the Commission has asked several telecommunications firms to share mobile data in order to help stem the spread of the virus. This, of course, is not without risks to privacy and begs us to question which should be prioritized amid crisis moments such as these, privacy or public health guidelines. But is this even a false dichotomy under the circumstances? So Ivo, thank you very much for joining us here today. And I think talking about the coronavirus and the challenges this creates to the data protection world, I think that's the most appropriate place for us to start today. So perhaps I could begin by asking you how the coronavirus outbreak has highlighted the importance of having quick and easy access to particular data streams, and how specifically data is currently being mobilized to good effect in the fight against coronavirus.
Yeah, good morning to everyone, and thanks Barbara and Samuel. And first of all, I have to apologize on behalf of Roberto Viola, who was going to be here doing this chat, but he is combating the coronavirus right now, so that's why I'm here. So your question about data and the coronavirus, it's actually quite interesting what's happening there. I don't think that ever the importance of data has been so clear for everyone. Many people are glued to their screens. They're following the number of deaths. They're following how the virus is spreading. Also, the current crisis shows the enormous potential of data. The impact of data analytics on decision making has been huge. Some of the decisions that had been taken by governments have been reversed because of the outcome of the analytical models based on data. So this also shows more in general the importance of data use for the common good. And we have been working on that already for a few years. We had an expert group that was exactly looking at this issue. They came out with a report at the same time as the publications of the data strategy, with some quite interesting strands they propose, including a legislative framework for B2G data sharing. Now, concretely, how is data being used to combat the virus? At European level, we are working together with our colleagues in GRC to model what is happening across Europe. And of course, you need data for that, including, as you mentioned, telcos data. And what we're also trying to do is to make sure, as an outflow of our open data policy, that a lot of the public sector data that is relevant for doing the analysis is also available for everyone in the most easily findable way. So data, yes, is making a massive difference during this crisis, and it really shows also the potential of data for the coming years, because it shows that efficiency of decisions depends more and more on data. It also shows how products based on analytics can really make a difference.
Great. So do you think some of the crisis measures in terms of open data that are being employed at the current time, do you think these crisis measures could feed into the European strategy for data in the long term?
Well, as you may have seen, one of the items that we put on the agenda for the Data Act in 2021 is business to government data sharing. And yeah, I definitely think that the current crisis and people realizing how much you need the data to do something concrete, I think it will make a difference for the discussion, and I think it will definitely feed into the policy discussion and also into, well, our impact assessment, because before we move towards legislation, we have to very carefully look at what are the effects. And I think, well, the coronavirus is showing why this data is so badly needed.
Mm-hmm. And in that vein, Ivo, I mean, we've heard a few rumors about various digital policies having to be pushed back maybe into 2021. What's, in terms of the timeline for the data strategy, are we likely to see it brought forward or pushed back as with some of the other policy frameworks?
Well, I don't think it's clear at the moment what will happen exactly in terms of the timing. Of course, there will be a call to speed up because it shows how important these actions are. At the same time, we want to do a very careful process together with the stakeholders. And well, as this meeting shows, it is possible to get all the stakeholders together, but at the same time, it's more difficult to organize gatherings and to get the input we need. So we have this consultation open until the 31st of May, and some of the stakeholders are calling to get more time because they also have to organize themselves. So this kind of issues will be looked at very carefully to see whether we can stick to the time schedule, which is what, well, I think we should try for the moment. Whether we should speed up will be difficult, but who knows, or whether we should delay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and thinking about the European strategy for data more generally now, perhaps you could give our listeners an insight into the thinking behind this strategy. And how could creating sectoral data spaces be an opportunity for the bloc to make the most out of these types of resources? And why have we lagged behind in the past with regards to making the most out of industrial data?
Yeah, okay, so what was the thought behind the strategy? First of all, well, data is crucial for the economy, for the efficiency of all the sectors, but also for creating new products and new services. Data is also crucial for our daily lives, for combating the coronavirus, just an example, but more in general, to get to better health systems, more efficient health systems, to combat climate change. Data is a crucial factor in all of this. Now, it's also an area where there are huge opportunities for Europe. As you've said before, we missed the boat with the consumer data that has been taken by the big platforms, but the data that exists today is only a fraction of the data that will exist in 5 years' time. right? So the data is still growing quite exponentially, and there is a lot of potential there. At the same time, we see the move towards the edge, from centralized data storage towards the edge. That is also going to create enormous new opportunities. So in that context, we think that Europe really has a game to play, and Europe has the possibility to basically be at the forefront. And how do we want to do that? Well, first, the vision is to create a common European data space, a single common European data space with a number of characteristics. First of all, there should be ample of data available, right, for use. Second, it's really important that the data can flow between countries, but also between sectors. Then we want to do this in a European way. So in full respect of European values, in full respect of European rules, in particular the privacy legislation, GDPR is really important there. And fourthly, we would like to make sure that there are clear rules for who can access and who can use what data. So that is the big vision. Now, we realize, of course, that not all the sectors can deal with data in the same way, because when you talk about health data, there are different questions compared to manufacturing data. So we have to break that down. And on top of a horizontal framework, we have to take action in the different individual sectors. Now, you may have seen in the data strategy that we have identified a number of these common European data spaces, as we call them. And these common European data spaces, they would combine rules, governance mechanisms, agreements between partners, but also technical infrastructure. So the ones we mention are the Green Deal data space, there's the manufacturing data space, the financial data space, skills data space. So there are 9 of them. Health, of course, very important, and perhaps we can go more into detail in a moment. Then, well, infrastructure. So this is not just about rules, but it's also about building data technologies. And we would like to reduce our dependencies on non-EU technologies. You may have seen that we announced a major project, a high impact project, putting 2 billion euros on the table. If the negotiations on the multi-annual financial framework go in the right directions, we hope that industry and member states will also do their part. And there we also would like to build on and to draw experience, to draw inspiration from projects that have been kicked off in Germany, like Gaia X, or the Cloud de Confiance in France. So a lot of things are happening, and we must make sure that the things come together at the European level. A last point I want to make here, and it's your question about have we missed the boat with industrial data? No, not at all. I think your point was very clear in the beginning. We are behind in terms of the first wave of innovation based on data, which was the consumer data. So that's being taken by the big platforms. But there is a new wave of data coming, and a lot of that is going to be industrial data. And there, Europe has everything to play for. We have a very strong industrial basis. A lot of the data will be generated in Europe, and we must make sure that it's us benefiting from the data.
Great. And just to return to a point that you made, Ivo, there about the health sector and the potential sensitivities around data sharing in that sector, particularly. How are you going to balance this? How are you going to find a strategy that allows for an efficient and sustainable data sharing regime within the health sector, whereas at the same time not compromising data protection standards and ensuring that citizens are fully protected in that specific sector?
Yeah, no, that's indeed that's the balance we have to find. On the other hand, I don't think you should pitch privacy against data use. I think both are two sides of the same medal. This is about a conscious and proactive way of dealing with data, right? I think that is that's an important message. It's not one against the other. It's doing it in a conscious way. Of course, we have to fully respect GDPR. Very important legislation. There were some mumblings a few years ago that this is never going to work, but now actually it's being taken over by the rest of the world, right? Japan has adopted it. California has GDPR-like legislation. Other jurisdictions are following. Now, one thing we see happening in a number of member states is that they're setting up structures to handle this tension between, on the one hand, privacy, GDPR, and on the other hand, the enormous potential of data, for example, to combat cancer, right? So Finland has set up a data permit authority that basically decides who can use what health data in what situations. So they take away the difficult task of handling GDPR in practice from some of the health institutions to make sure and take decisions about who can do what with the data, right? France has done something similar. Germany also has legislation in place since last year doing the same thing. So what we would like to do in the first instance with what we call the governance of the common European data spaces is to make sure that member states have the structures in place, that they have the processes in place to handle this kind of sensitive data that actually should be reused, but not be reused in the wrong way, right? So this is a question of having the right structures and processes in place. Another example of such structures and processes is the whole area of data altruism, or sometimes called data donation. Now, if I want to give my body for science or to have pieces reused when I die, I know how to do that exactly. If I want to give my health data today to combat the coronavirus, I don't know how to do that. I wouldn't know where to do that. If I want to give my mobility data to improve mobility in Luxembourg, where I live, I don't know how to do that. So it's that kind of structures and processes we would like member states to put in place for the common good. And that is going to be one of the focal points of what we would like to put as a proposal on the table at the end of this year as a first legal instrument. That's not the Data Act yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. And coming back, Ivo, to the subject of coronavirus and data use, do you believe, therefore, it is a false dichotomy between the privacy question and the data use question? And do you think this binary argument that has kind of been all across the media over recent days should take a back seat, and privacy standards should kind of make way in crisis moments such as these? And the second question is along this axis, is this idea of data donation. Very, very interesting indeed. Do you think that could be implemented as part of our response to the coronavirus outbreak? Do you think there could be the opportunity for citizens to volunteer their own data for medical or research use?
Yes, let me start with the data donation. Yes, I think that there is a potential for people to actually donate their data, but then again, apart from hospital structures where the data is collected, and some of the data can be shared because you sign something off normally going into a hospital, there are no structures for people to actually do it. So there would be a potential. But what I'm saying shows that we need the structures and the processes in place to get things going. I don't think that will be in place before this crisis ends, but there may be need for further crisis, right? Now, your question about whether privacy should take a backseat at the moment, in a way, you're again making this dichotomy, right, between privacy on the one hand and data use on the other hand. Of course, we are in a crisis. We have to respect the rules, but you also see that the data protection boards in different member states, they've given guidance, and of course there is flexibility, and also within the GDPR there is flexibility that should be used. When I talked about these structures in the member states for the secondary use of health data, right? That is not done by changing the GDPR. That's done by using the possibilities that the GDPR offers actually to make data use happen in a privacy compliant way.
Great. And coming back now to the strategy more generally, the paper itself, or the communication as it currently stands, promises to guarantee rules for access and use of data that are fair, partial, and clear. How is the Commission planning to fulfill such a promise and guarantee equal inclusion and fair share of benefits among all member states?
Yeah. So first of all, we see that some member states are moving and others are not moving. So that risks to create a not level playing field. First of all, for companies. Second, for cross-border products, but also for the member states themselves. So we would like to have the member states move in the same direction at the same speed, because it's going to benefit their economies, right? Now, we've had this discussion on open data. So why would Romania open up its data if it's German firms that actually benefit? Right? But the interesting thing is, it's not just German firms who benefit and who make these pan-European products. There's also Romanian firms, Bulgarian firms, where we see that very interesting new innovative services are being built. So the potential of the data economy is there for the whole of Europe to be taken. And I think that we should move forward together to a higher level. In terms of open government data, and in terms also of access to other data sets. Now, we have announced this Data Act, where we've also indicated a number of areas that we will work on. One is a more structural way of looking at business to government data sharing. Very relevant now in the context of the Corona crisis. We also indicated that we will look at user empowerment to make sure that, well, the portability right that's there under Article 20 of the GDPR that allows you to move your data and to get data about you whenever you want it, to make sure that it's more actionable. We're also looking at issues where things are simply not clear, like code-generated data in industrial settings. Let me give an example, right? I've got a robot in my factory, and this robot is producing a lot of data, and it's sending the data back to the manufacturer of the robot, right? But at the same time, I have the same data stream. So who can do what with these data streams? Sometimes things are simply not clear. Sometimes this is also regulated by contracts. But then you get into a position that, well, one of the players may actually be more powerful. So this contractual clause is a standard clause, and you just take it or leave it. Is that fair or not? So that's the type of things we are going to look at to make sure that data use increases and increases in a fair way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. The strategy hasn't been without criticism from some in the global data economy. There have been various players who have suggested it could lead to data localization, forcing companies to store and process data domestically, thereby adopting more of a protectionist approach. How do you respond to people who accuse the Commission of things like this?
Well, yeah, I've seen also some of the articles like that, but an important point here, Samuel, is that the data strategy is not against organizations or countries outside Europe. No, it's about the way we want to organize things in Europe, right? So we want to organize it in a way that respects fully our values, our legislation. That's really important. And we also would like to have some autonomy to make sure that we can control how these values are respected. So I think that's quite simple. It's not against anyone, but this is the European way of handling data. This is how we want to do that. And this is how we're going to move forward.
Great. And you touched on this point briefly a bit earlier. But of course, we're now fastly moving towards a new data paradigm where less data is processed and analyzed in data centers, but rather directly in smart connected objects closer to the user. Of course, this brings a lot of challenges with regards to cybersecurity. How do you, or how will you look to tackle challenges such as these and preserve data security in the age of edge computing, for example?
Yeah, that's indeed, it's a headache. Cybersecurity in the new data economy. An example: once we have connected cars and autonomously driving cars on the streets, well, you don't want that system to be hacked, right? That could lead to massive problems. It's just one example. Also, you don't want your health data to be hacked and changed, right? So cybersecurity is going to be one of the big challenges for the data economy. Now, the good news is that Europe has moved already on cybersecurity with the NIS directive, with the actions that ENISA is taking, and that there's more in store for us that has been announced in the digital strategy. For example, this idea of setting up a joint cybersecurity unit, and also the review of the NIS directive. All of that is going to look at the future. It's an area that's moving fast, so we must make sure that the legislation is fit for purpose, that the structures in place are fit for purpose to handle the different challenges.
Great. And jumping from edge computing to cloud infrastructures, the strategy, of course, also noted that the executive plans to coordinate work on a European cloud federation. What can you tell us about this, and how closely is the Commission coordinating, for example, with the Germans on Gaia-Chi and the French as well in their own cloud infrastructure project?
Yeah, so we are coordinating very closely with the Germans and with the French. But of course, the idea is that this becomes something European. It shouldn't be a German project that's Europeanized. No, this is a European project where we build on Gaia-X and other initiatives. Another important message here is that, well, the idea is not to simply basically replicate the offer that's there already in the European market, that is offered by, for example, well, in particular, US companies. Let's look at areas where Europe really can make a difference, like low power, so green data centers. Let's look at the future of cloud linked to the edge. Let's look at the future in terms of a secure cloud in the edge, right? So this is not about replicating what exists already to have our own thing. No, this is looking towards the future to areas where actually Europe can make a difference and can have an advantage.
Great, thank you, Ivo. You've been very gracious with your time. Unfortunately, we've just about run out, I'm afraid. So I'd like to invite you maybe to make a closing comment on the EU's data strategy in general, and perhaps what we can learn amid this very bizarre time in the world of data protection and data use, and how these lessons can help to propel Europe forward for the future in this marketplace, please.
All right, just in a few sentences. Now, first of all, I think that we have to act now. this is really the right moment to do things. What is going to be one of the big challenges, I think, in the years ahead is to find the balance between acting on the one hand at a sectoral level and avoiding at the same time to create new silos. So that's why we need horizontal measures next to sectoral initiatives and sectoral measures. And yeah, as I mentioned before, I think one of the key issues is to move forward in terms of structures and processes that allow us to get away from this strong dichotomy. On the one hand, data protection, on the other hand, data use, because they are two sides of the same medal, and we should realize that and we should move ahead accordingly.
Great, Ivo, thank you so much for joining us here today. There's a lot of interesting insights you've given us there. So I'd like to thank you once again for stepping in for Roberto Viola at the last minute, and I trust he's well under the circumstances. So thank you very much again. And this discussion is finished for now. And I'd like to hand back over to Barbara, who will introduce the next panel. Thank you very much. And thank you for everyone for tuning in. Thank you.